My name is Ross Kessig. Thank you so much for the introduction, Brenda. I run the DFW office for Empower Texas and Texas for Fiscal Responsibility, and she's probably going to hate me right now for doing this, but my colleague until the end of the year at least is Nicole Pierce, and she's sitting right over there. Cole Lyle, who is a Marine veteran and served overseas, is also interning with us till the end of the year, so we're very fortunate to have him here. He's actually over with Michael Sullivan and our coalition partners doing a speaking engagement in Bedford, so he is not here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Before we get started on the program, I want to just make a couple comments and put tonight's program in context for everyone in the audience. But following that, we'll give each potential legislator up here an opportunity to talk a little bit about, for a few minutes, what their main legislative priorities are. I give a couple examples of that, and then I'll lead the discussion and go back into some questions about some specific policy items and give them an opportunity to talk about the 84th legislative session, what the big issues are going to be, what issues we all need to be aware of. I know there's a lot of different issues that people care about, and I can put some of those into context and how they relate to the issue sets that we focus on at Texas for Fiscal Responsibility. Everyone right now is pretty focused on national elections. And I used to be one of those people, casually, watch Fox News and listen to Rush Limbaugh, and wanted to throw your shoe at the television every single time you listen to the political news. There's a lot of frustration in the country with what's going on in Washington for good reason. The reason why I bring that up is because all the talk right now on TV is how Republicans have to take back the Senate. And if only Republicans ran government, all of our problems will be solved. Or at least we'd be able to make a lot more progress, because clearly the Democrats have shown that they don't care about taxpayers, they don't care about women's health rights, they don't care about the life issue, they don't care about civil liberties, they don't care about the Constitution. They don't seem to care about much but their own political self-interest. And that's a bipartisan problem, but the reason why I bring that up again is because in Texas, we are very fortunate because we don't have that problem. Republicans run both chambers of the legislature. Hopefully, after November's elections, Republicans will run every statewide office in the state. So Republicans set the agenda. It was that way last session. I'm pretty young. I looked up the political history of the state of Texas, and I realized it wasn't always that way. And it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't that way. In fact, in 1996, that was the first time that Republicans had a majority in the Texas State Senate in 130 years. Okay? In fact, on the national scale, and this is no knock against Congressman Ralph Hall, respected longtime congressman, when he lost his primary this cycle, for his primary bid, Republican primary bid for re-election, that was the first time that any sitting Republican incumbent in Congress from Texas lost in the primary in state history. Now that tells me that people are not actively engaged in the affairs of their government. And if we're going to be a self-governing people, it's going to require the active participation of the people. We can't blame people in office for not representing our interests if we are not actively engaged in encouraging those who are doing good things and criticizing those with whom we disagree. And so tonight's going to be an opportunity to have some discussion about what are the priorities for the legislative session this go around. And again, Texas is uniquely positioned to do exactly what conservatives want. I'll give you one example about what didn't happen last session. So 94% of Republican primary voters on the 2012 ballot said that they supported a strict constitutional limit to the growth of state spending. And it was a specific ballot language on the ballot for those who voted in the primary. It said we want strict constitutional limits that would limit the growth of the state budget to population growth plus inflation. And legislation that was introduced in committee last session did not get a hearing, if I'm correct. Now, how does that happen? How does the dominant party not even allow a hearing to be held on a piece of legislation for which 94% of their own constituents want? I can guarantee you one thing. If Democrat voters, if 94% of them could agree on anything, okay, they would beat their representatives over the head and make sure that that got advanced, whether it's in Washington or in the state of Texas. So we need to do a better job of being involved in our governing. I know Collin County activists here have a track record of being involved at every level of government. Up here, I wanted to put the Texas Conservative Budget, which is a coalition. This is headed by Texas Public Policy Foundation. They've already released figures based on growth projections of population and inflation of what the state budget should look like if it were to grow proportionally, if it were to grow at the rate of population growth plus inflation. And that is with state funds and with all funds, because as you know, about 35% of our funding comes from the federal government to balance our budget. So hopefully this time, there was a lot of changes in the primary. I benefited from that as a constituent. I live in District 115, and my incumbent that I wasn't too happy with got replaced by Matt Rinaldi in the Republican primary. I'm very excited about that. So enough about that. I want to move on and give our panel up here an opportunity to talk about two items for a few minutes that they want to prioritize. I know everyone's staffs who's existing legislators have a lot of things they're probably working on, but we'll have an opportunity to talk about more issues. But if you could just name two things, two items, two topics that you would like to prioritize or that are important to you, go ahead and do that and spend a couple minutes talking about that. Mr. Hall, feel free to go first. Oh.
Just wanted to go ahead and welcome, Don Heffines up. It looks like he just made just in time, so we can give him a round of applause. And then, Mr. Heffines, I think right down, actually, do you want to head this way so you're not blocked by the column? And if you want to repeat the question.
Yes. So we don't want to shellac Mr. Heffines with a question he didn't hear. No. Maybe we do. I don't know. No. One more thing. Dorinda asked me that the bios for all these fine gentlemen are in the program. So if you want to read their history and background, go ahead and do that. We put it there so we didn't have to make it part of the program, and we could move along to the policy stuff. I think it's the red piece of paper. Anyways, Mr. Heffines, we're going to have each individual on the panel just talk about two issues that you want to prioritize during the legislative session. Just for a few minutes. We'll have more opportunity to cover more issues, after you're done. So go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Talk about two issues that you think are important you want to prioritize.
Great. Excellent. My favorite thing to do is give a microphone to a politician.
Yeah.
I'll make it quick. Well, the first two things I'm going to focus on is transportation, and I really feel like the legislature's neglected the infrastructure for a long time, and I'm really adamant about getting more money into TxDOT, and I'd like to get $6.5 billion into TxDOT annually without raising taxes or increasing fees. We can do it. We're going to have a lot more money to work with at next session than we've ever had, up to $10 billion more, and we can make the hard calls. It's always about choosing where we're going to spend our money. And we've got a lot of new freshman Republican senators in the Senate, and we're going to be making the right decisions about where to spend that money. And I really feel like we need to put it into transportation and not do any more toll roads. All right, second thing I want to work on is we don't need more toll roads, and we don't need this HOV lane towed out here either. We need that free. Nobody uses it. But anyway. So no more toll roads. Second thing I want to work on, and I think it's very popular, it's a nonpartisan issue, and that's term limits. I knocked on thousands of doors in this campaign, and let me tell you, everybody is for term limits, and it's very, very popular. It's something that I'm going to focus on. I've already drafted that legislation. I can get in a lot of details on that, but I won't bore you with it, but it's very reasonable, and I'm exempting all the current members from it, so they'll vote for it, hopefully. But it's 12 years for the Senate and the House. It's 8 years for the statewide, and 5 years for agency heads, and it's 8 years for local, and you just sit out for 4 years and you lose your seniority, but you can rerun for that position. But term limits is a big focus of mine, and transportation. Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree with what Ross brought up. Is that one of the first things we need to do is limit spending. The spending growth in Texas is kind of getting out of hand. We don't have a revenue problem in Texas, but we do have a spending problem. So I'll be fully supportive of limiting the spending. One of the other subjects, though, that is I found in the year that we were campaigning that everybody is concerned about, and that's what's happening to the rights of our citizens because we won't address our illegal alien problem that we have here in Texas. And we have to address that problem and stop just blaming the federal government for it. We can close the candy stores or stop the magnets where we can require E-Verify with the employers. We can limit the social services and other services that are provided. There's a lot we can do as a state to save money with what is costing us with illegal immigration. The other major issue dovetails with what Don Huffines is talking about, and that is changing the way we do roads. Our roads have been underfunded. It is one of the major responsibilities of our state government is to fund the infrastructure. And by not having funded that infrastructure, we have built roads that are going to cost us, in some estimates, 9 times what it would have cost if we had properly funded them and built highways and freeways instead of having these private-public partnerships that are costing us a lot of money. And I will also be looking to try to stop private toll road development and eliminate private companies from having eminent domain authority. So.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here with you this evening. I was talking with my wife about this organization earlier today, and you are a truly valued organization. You're all a treasure, and thank you for having us this evening. Well, Ross, you were right when you were talking about the strict spending cap that the voters in the previous ballot clearly said that they desired. I filed that bill early on in the session, and it did not get a hearing. There were probably some other bills that were very similar that were filed. It did not even get a hearing. One of the first things that we'll need to do is to determine our strategy for the legislative session, and that will be determined in large measure by the very first vote that we'll be taking for Speaker of the House. And so we're prayerful that our friend Scott Turner will be elected Speaker of the House. If we are successful with that endeavor, which I believe we will be, then we can go on offense. Now, if for any reason that we're not, then we have to go on defense in a lot of measures. One of the ideas that have been floated would that we would just send all of our good conservative legislation over to these guys in the Senate and let them pass it out, and then they'd come back to the House floor. The moderates have already said, well, if they're successful in owning the speakership, that they will be stacking the calendars committee again and not let any of that legislation out on the floor. So either way, we're going to be in for an interesting session. So we're working on 2025 bills. We will prioritize those and determine which ones we'll actually file later on in the next month or so. Some of your best bills you try to hold close to your vest because it's not unusual for others to hear about those and then to try to take them or to come up with strategies to block them. So a couple, though, that were a little bit interesting, I thought you might be interested in, is that in our continuing efforts to move control of our schools to the local level, to the school districts, away from a centralized command and control from Austin. Oh, by the way, Howard, we were talking earlier, and I said, Howard, what have you been up to? And he goes, well, I have been down to the People's Republic. And I thought, oh, he went to China. And he said, no, I just went to Austin. So. But to allow the superintendents and principals to hire as teachers those who have master's degrees and to teach grades 7 through 12 in those areas of their masters and not with the standard teacher certificate process. So to allow those principals and those superintendents the ability to find those specialists and people with those backgrounds to teach the students in their area of specialty, at least to give them that option to do that. Another thing we'd like to do is to allow our veterans who already have plenty of experience and training with firearms to go ahead and get their CHL without having to go through the training process. They'd still have to go through the background checks and all of the paperwork that's involved, but just to forego those training processes.
It's hard to pick just two.
We'll talk about more here in a minute, so just
What's
go
that?
for it. I said we'll talk about more issues here in a
I
minute,
know.
so just,
it's
yeah.
hard to pick just two because so much is so important. We need to continue to protect life, protect the Second Amendment, and reform education in the state of Texas. However, if I had to pick the two most important things I'd like to focus on, the first and the most obvious is with a nearly 2/3 Republican majority in the state house, there is absolutely no reason at all why we should have a Texas budget that grows the size of Texas government. That just should be a line in the sand for us. And Ross put up a little graphic there earlier about the conservative Texas budget. And it's a great proposal because it only increases the size of government for inflation plus population growth. So it effectively keeps the size of government the same, the real size of government the same. But I think the conservative Texas budget's a little misnomer because as conservatives, I would like to shrink the size of government. What I see that as, and I love the Texas Public Policy Foundation's work on that. However, what I would call that is the compromise Texas budget. The Democrats want to grow government, we want to shrink it. Something that keeps the government size the same is a compromise. It's not necessarily a win, and that should be eminently reasonable next session. So our goal is going to be to keep the size of government the same or shrink it while prioritizing the important things in the budget, which are transportation, education, and water. Those things should be funded first, and they weren't last session. They were funded last. Our wants were funded before our needs, and we need to come up with some structural way to prioritize those things in the budget. The second thing that I would prioritize is the issue that 28% of Texans in recent polls have labeled their most important issue facing Texas. Nothing else hit double digits, and that's immigration and border security. We have done absolutely nothing to stem the tide of immigration in the last two sessions, despite a 2/3 or a near 2/3 Republican majority in each house. We need to do something this session. We need to end in-state tuition for illegal aliens and remove all benefits to the extent allowed by federal law. And we need to pass a bill, and I've actually started writing a bill that would criminalize the hiring of illegal aliens with a complete defense to prosecution being that you used E-Verify. So those would be my two. Yep.
Well, it's good to see everyone tonight. Welcome to the heart of House District 67. It's great to be with you, and I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to have to take off for another event on the other side of Plano after I talk, but it is really good to be with you tonight, and it is really good to have some fresh blood with us. You know, Don and Bob and Matt are going to be wonderful additions to the Texas legislature, and I think they would all agree that they, in large part, owe their victories to the grassroots of Texas. People just like you who are willing to not go on vacation, to block walk, to work phone banks, to give money, to sacrifice your own time to see to it that not just Republicans, but that true constitutional conservatives are serving you as public servants in the Texas legislature. I'm so excited about this next session. We're gonna have a lot of fun down there, and I think we're gonna make the grassroots proud because at the end of the day, we serve you, not the other way around. Like these guys, it's tough to address just the two most important issues when we're working on so much for the legislative session. One of my main focuses from a personal standpoint right now is Becky and I are expecting our third child literally any minute. So I actually may not be going to my other event tonight. I may be going to the hospital. I've got my phone right here just in case. But we're expecting Landry to be here any day. And you know, when you're welcoming a new child into the world, so many of you know, you have to do certain things to prepare your house, to prepare the nursery. You get the car seat all set up. You buy diapers and clothes. There's a lot of things you have to do to make sure that you're ready for whenever that child gets here. And that's what we've done for Landry, and that's really what I feel like is our responsibility as in the Texas legislature, is to prepare Texas for the next generation of Texans. to ensure that they have the same opportunities that we had growing up in a state like Texas. And for those of us who were less fortunate to grow up in other places, but that's okay, we forgive you. So what does that look like in the Texas legislature? Well, that for instance, means us funding transportation, building roads without raising taxes, without raising fees, and without adding toll roads where they're unnecessary. That means ensuring that we do everything possible to stop the radical secularism that is infecting our public schools all across this state. Not only radical secularism, radical liberalism, we live in a country that is founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and we ought to not be afraid to enforce and teach those principles in our public schools, starting with certain issues related to the sanctity of life. One of the bills I filed last session would prohibit an organization like Planned Parenthood, who right now has unfettered access to our kids in public schools across the state. The bill I filed last session would have prohibited an abortion provider from accessing our kids in our public schools. And that bill, like Scott was talking about, didn't even get a hearing in the Texas House, didn't make it to the floor. We're going to file that bill again, and I'm confident we're going to pass it this next session. That also includes stopping Common Core and C-Scope. Last session, let me tell you, we learned a lot last session about the process and about some of the trickery that's played in the Texas legislature, and we thought we dropped a bomb on C-Scope and Common Core, and we did a lot of damage to it, but we didn't kill it. This next session, we are going to kill Common Core and C-Scope in the state of Texas. And last but not least, it ensures, like these guys talked about as well, that we are truly limiting government. It's really easy to talk a good game at home and talk about limited government and low taxes and getting out of your way as a parent and as a business owner. It's another thing to go to Austin and actually fight for legislation that does just that. And there's 3 things that we need to do starting out, real simple things. We need to make sure that Greg Abbott is our next governor and that Wendy Davis is sent packing once and for all. Actually, 4 things. We need to also elect Connie Burton in the state Senate in District 10 to take Wendy Davis's place. Secondly, we need to elect Dan Patrick as our next lieutenant governor. And third, last but not least, Scott Turner needs to be our next Speaker of the Texas House. Because all of the things that you've heard us talk about tonight, none of that will happen if we don't have the leadership in place to let it happen. The Texas voters have spoken. You've told us what you want. You've elected true constitutional conservatives, and our leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor's office ought to reflect that as well. So it's an honor to serve you. I hope you'll contact us as we prepare for session. We're there to serve you, not the other way around. So let us know what you need, and those are the things we'll work on. Thanks again.
Well, thanks everyone for being relatively timely in their comments. Appreciate that. So we've touched on a lot of different issues. One of the ones that I wanted to start with is actually one that Mr. Huffines brought up with, and I think everyone touched on, sorry for the echo, and that's transportation. So we've done a lot of work at TFR on looking into the transportation issue. Dorinda mentioned an article I'd written today on TexRail, which is going to convert a freight line rail. It's going to add passenger service on the west end of the Cotton Belt from Fort Worth into DFW Airport. Now, most people think that TxDOT spends money on roads or toll roads, but TxDOT actually spends a lot of money on rail projects. And I don't know about you, but last time I checked, there wasn't a single rail project that made money, or when you considered the replacement cost, the operation cost, the subsidies that were required, all that stuff, actually helped reduce traffic congestion on roadways, okay? Now, the Obama administration has set aside stimulus money. They have 32 federal grant programs sitting in the wings waiting to fund local politicians and state governments that are ready to partner with them to blow money on rail projects that will not address traffic congestion problems. So even if they're used, they normally take riders off of buses onto rail. The reason why I bring that up is because part of, I think the problem, and it was echoed tonight, is that roads are not prioritized. And the reason why we shouldn't have more toll roads or convert roads into toll roads is because we don't want to pay twice for them. We already pay for them through our local taxes and our state taxes. But I think a lot of people don't realize that, TxDOT's going to spend $197 million to fund a 6-mile monorail in El Paso. The TexRail project I just mentioned in the Cotton Belt here in the Metroplex, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram said TxDOT's, or the state, I don't know which agency, is kicking in $120 million for that. We totaled up $500 million of money that is going to projects that have nothing to do with roads, including $50 million for jetpack research. Okay? So, and I'm not making this up. So anyways, I wanted to give an opportunity for some of the folks up here to talk a little bit about how we can go about addressing our transportation problems. I don't want to get into Prop 1. TFR doesn't have a position on Prop 1. I'll be voting no because I don't think that we should go into a savings account designed for emergency purposes to fund items that should be funded in the budget, right? And whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think everyone can agree that we're okay with the state and local governments, or governments in general, spending money on roads. I think that's something we all have consensus on. So I just want to give, they don't have to talk about TxDOT, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to talk about transportation a little bit since it was brought up, and some of the ideas you have about how we can address some of the transportation needs of the state, which are real needs. And anyone's, feel free to go. What's that? Oh, Matt, if you want to start, go for it. And just try to keep your comments, I'm sorry, I know it's a complicated issue, just a couple minutes because I want to move on to the other things that you guys mentioned that are priorities to your office.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. TxDOT needs approximately $4 billion more in funding each session. I think probably you can root that down to about $3 billion if you really tried. I think you can get that by dedicating the monies that we already pay to vehicle sales tax to go specifically to roads and all diversions from the gas tax money, and that would adequately fund it. I'm also against spending money on rail projects that are wasteful. I think even in New York City, the commuter percentage that uses the subway system is 8%, and I think that's the highest in the country. They're wasteful, and they won't be used in Texas. And regarding the jetpacks, might be a little cool, but but no, we should be funding jetpacks as well.
I was gonna say I might could support the jetpack thing if I'm a test pilot of the jetpacks. That sounds like fun. To understand the transportation crisis that we have from a funding aspect, you really have to take some pie chart history going back to the early 70s. As late as the late 70s, almost a third of the Texas budget was transportation, was road building and road maintenance. And today it's around 7%, so it's quite a bit less. And if you examine those pie charts and to look at the three major areas, human services, education, and then transportation, you will find that the piece that's exploded, that has crowded out the transportation issue, is human services. And so during the last year, our office has worked with the governor's office to try to identify every area in the human services budget that we could cut as a state, and we found out that there is very little that we have sole authority over as a state. Much of it is federally mandated and is tied to other federal money. It's going to take, and we're working on this, it's going to take a lot of guts for Texans and the Texas legislature and Texas government leadership to say, you know what, these human services really don't belong in government. Government truly can't afford them. Churches should be providing a lot of these human services, nonprofits and charities, where these things historically have been in this great nation. And really this whole explosion of human services has been over the past, 50 years. And the evidence is just in the math. We can't afford it. And if we begin to reverse that trend and quit crowding out our charities and our churches from doing what they're supposed to do in the first place and return those things to their normal place, then again we can correct that pie chart. And I'll just mention that the numbers that TxDOT's throwing out there about that $3, $4, $5 billion is to maintain current levels of congestion. So if we're going to make a dent in congestion, we're going to have to supply more funds than that. And really the only place your two choices are either grow revenue, taxes basically, or cut education, or cut human services. And human services, I don't believe, are a core function of government, and that's where we ought to be looking.
That was good, Scott. I agree with everything you just said. But on the issue of roads, while I agree that we need to have a whole lot more funding, that is only half of the problem. And doing that is kind of like the way the Democrats would solve a problem. That is just by throwing more money at it. What has to go along with that is a revamp, completely a clean sheet approach to how we do roads in Texas. We have a myriad of authorities between the COGS and the Regional Transportation Commissions, and what TxDOT does that is got to be brought under one policy that is focused around a pay-as-you-go road development process, and get TxDOT out of the business that it is. It's not just jetpacks. The other part of that is about $100 million they want to spend on studying hovercraft, and we spent they just had to spend $100 million trying to bail out one of the P3 toll roads down around Austin, and $50 million bailing out the one around Tyler. Toll roads that are built where people don't use. We have to have a policy change so that we put roads where they're needed to enhance commerce and for the people to be able to where they need to go, not where some limited number of businessmen can make a whole lot of money because they want a road to go in there, like what's about to happen in northeast Texas with the Blackland. So it's not just putting money in it, but it is a change in the policies and what TxDOT does and how it goes about doing it, focusing on roads that needs to happen.
I can certainly concur with everyone up here, but really what I want to emphasize that what TxDOT needs is about at least $6 to $7 billion. Okay, it's to stay with the level of congestion we've got. It's about $4 to $5 billion, and I really do think, Matt, that it's more like $6.5 billion. My goal is to make sure we don't nibble around the edges on this issue. We can solve it once and for all. I think the stars are lined up. We're out of runway on it. They can't sell any more paper. We've got to get them a lot of money. My position is, can they really have too much money? Money's the answer, okay, to get rid of toll roads. I think we're going to have a lot of bills submitted that's going to revamp TxDOT, that's going to look at cutting some of their staff, that's going to do a lot of different things, how we fund roads, how we position roads, who picks it and who doesn't. That's all well and good, and we're going to do that. But the first thing we got to do is decide how much money we really need to get them, and then we got to figure out how we're going to get it to them without raising taxes or increasing fees. And what I want to do is lockbox out all the motor vehicle sales tax revenue. It brings in about $3.8 billion. Abbott's campaigned for it. Patrick's campaigned for it. That gets us about $4 billion. And I'm for Prop 1. And the reason I'm for Prop 1 is because I feel like the fundamental role of government is transportation. Okay, we're going to have oil and gas severance tax revenue is going straight up. It's a straight up graft right now. And we're going to have, I really do, we got $8 billion right now in the rainy day fund. This Prop 1's it gets us half of the increase, okay? And it cannot be spent on toll roads, the new money. So if we take say $4 billion, round it out with motor vehicle sales tax, we take the 1.5 to 1.7, that gives us 5.7. We only need another $1 billion to get to the number I want to get at. But the first thing we got to do is agree to that number, and then we can strive to how to get there. We can stop diversions. On the books right now in DFW is $35 billion worth of projects that are behind. Every one of them are needed, and that's just in DFW. Houston's got the same amount. Austin's got another $20 billion in projects. Those are concrete roads that need to be built. I can tell you guys, they will tow every single road in this metroplex. You're going to have to pay to go down it if we don't get them a lot of money, because they don't have any other way to expand capacity except to toll it, because they don't have any money, and we're not going to let them sell any more debt. So that's just kind of how I think about that. But I'm not for all wasting the money either, and we're going to revamp TxDOT to make sure it's used wisely once we get it to them.
Go ahead. Everyone give a warm round of applause for Matt Shaheen. Matt Shaheen, sorry, everyone messes up my last name too. He is the Republican nominee for House District 66. Yes, and that is the seat that Van Taylor has vacated as he'll be moving over to the Senate, which should be a great addition to the Senate. So thanks for coming. Let's give Mr. Shaheen an opportunity to say something real quick. We just wanted to talk about maybe one or two issues that you think are a priority during the legislative session. And if you just talk for just a couple minutes about that, we'll give you an opportunity to speak more as we circle back around.
Well, it sounds like we already talked about transportation. I'm trying to come up with a bill that we can double the taxes on all Mexican goods until they release our soldier. Would you guys support that? That'll be the only tax increase I ever support. You know, as conservatives, I think one of the things that is our responsibility is to come up with a counter to Obamacare. I think we need to come up with a free market approach that does address indigent health care. And I think many of you know that we've done some very innovative free market-based things for indigent health care in Collin County. The state mandates that counties provide indigent health care. And so one of the things that I'll be working on is introducing legislation to counter or be the conservative answer to Obamacare. And it'll have to do with incentives to doctors, allow commissioners' courts to provide tax cuts to doctors that will provide free health care and some arrangements for hospitals and those types of things. So I think it's incumbent upon us to not just be against Obamacare, we all are, but we do need an alternative for that. Otherwise, infrastructure, I think, is going to be a big focus. Sounds like we talked about transportation. I didn't hear the whole discussion about transportation, but I like the idea of dedicating the sales tax that's collected for vehicle sales that's already collected and dedicating that to transportation. Infrastructure is a big part of what we need to do. So is that good, or do you
That's
want me to
great.
keep going? Okay.
We're going to move on to some other issues. Thank you. I did want to mention one thing. A lot of people are not engaged at the county and local level, and as County Judge Self can tell you, and Matt Shaheen as a former county commissioner in Collin County, the amount of money that's available at the county and local level to help subsidize infrastructure projects, TxDOT partners with local governments to fund projects. Counties partner with cities to fund road projects. And what I've been focused on in the Metroplex is delving into what is county and local government doing with all their money. The North Central Texas Council of Governments, to which Judge Self is on the executive committee, they have a $170 million annual budget. They're just one of the amorphous governments or governing institutions in between the local and state level that are making a lot of transportation decisions. And a lot of the folks, whether it's transportation, whether it's a gun rights issue, whether it's a debt transparency issue, or anything that a lot of these folks are talking about, your local officials are either lobbying for or lobbying against a lot of those bills. And they're putting pressure on your legislators to make decisions that may not be in the best interest of taxpayers. So a lot of them, and they feel free to mention this if they want in some of their comments, but who we elect at the local level and the county level affects what happens in the legislature. I could show you who testified against local debt transparency legislation: superintendents or school board members of local school districts, TASB, TASBO, TASA, all the government employee or local public officials associations, the Texas Municipal League. You know, cities can issue debt at the local level through general obligation bonds without even putting it on the ballot. You know, the ways that local governments aren't restricted in how they can issue debt and how much debt they can issue, which is something the legislature could control or improve, is really troubling. And so transportation is one of those issues where it really is an issue that isn't just a legislative issue. It's a local government issue, it's a county government issue. So I just wanted to mention that. Some folks brought up some other issues. This wasn't on one of the things I wanted to ask, but since everyone seems to care a lot about it, including myself and people in this room, just real quick for a minute, what are some of the things the state can do in regards to the immigration issue? Because we hear a lot of talk about we're not doing anything, We're not doing enough. Clearly, the federal government doesn't care about border security or about improving legal immigration. You mentioned that. I know it relates to health and human services. It relates to public education. It relates to a lot of these issues that are putting fiscal pressure on our inability to properly fund transportation. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, the state of Texas is now, over the past couple months, doing a lot on the border. Probably most, if not all of us, have gone down and visited the border. I think you all are probably aware the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker allocated, I think it was $1 million a week of additional dollars. And then the governor called for additional National Guard down there. And I was down there, I think about 3 to 4 weeks ago, and that's had a significant impact. So the illegal entry into the state of Texas has declined by 2/3. Now the negative of that is the state, I think 6 or 8 years ago, was probably spending somewhere about $5 million a year on the border. Last legislative session, I think that was at $50 million, and now it's going to be probably in excess of $100 million. Those are all dollars that the federal government should be spending dollars on. There's a command center down there. They've got over 1,000. I talked about during the campaign about having technology, surveillance devices down there. There's over 1,000 different cameras all along the border. They've got blimps. They've got, I think there's 3 DPS boats that are going up and down the Rio. They've got blimps that are hovering over, having surveillance over the border. So the state of Texas is actually stepping up and doing quite a bit, and it has had an impact.
I agree with Matt. We got to focus on border security. The current surge, I think we need to continue. It wasn't just a temporary crisis. It's been a crisis for a very long time on the border, and the federal government has refused to do its job and is actively encouraging illegal immigrants to come to the United States. We need to stop it, and we need to fund DPS on the border. We need to continue the surge that we're currently doing. Also, we need to stop the magnets that attract illegal immigrants from coming here, and I talked about that during my priorities. We need to end benefits to illegal aliens. We need to cancel the DREAM Act, repeal the DREAM Act, and we need to pass some sort of an E-Verify bill that takes away the jobs magnet.
Representative-elect Rinaldi has a lot of good ideas. I'd like to share with you that the crisis is real, and it's more real than a lot of us would like to admit. I was leading a Bible study at our church on a Tuesday morning several months ago, and one of the gentlemen afterwards came up and he said, "Scott, I want you to know that my cousin has a family down along the river, along the border, and has a small ranch there. And he was approached by whom he knew to be cartel to lease some land, and he knew that they were going to use it for an airstrip for their illegal activities, and so he said no. They came back a couple of weeks later and offered to buy the entire ranch, and again he said no. And a couple of weeks later, he has 4 children. He had 4 children. There's a drive-by shooting and killed 2 of his kids, and that is on U.S. soil. So you have foreign terrorists on U.S. soil carrying out those type of activities against U.S. citizens. You don't hear a lot about it because the chambers of commerce in the area don't want you to know about it. You can't blame them for that, but it is the truth. It is happening. The other issue that we've talked about, these things that need to happen. Well, they do need to happen, but they don't happen without the right leadership in your state government. Let's just look at this recent surge that we give the governor most of the credit for making this happen, but it requires 3 signatures to fund this surge between legislative sessions. Okay. The governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House. If you look at the letter that authorizes this surge, you'll notice that the governor and the lieutenant governor signed it 2 to 3 months before the Speaker of the House signed that letter. Ladies and gentlemen, crimes were being committed, people were being abused, immigrants themselves were suffering, as well as, you know what was happening. And all the while, the Speaker was just sitting on the issue. So it's, again, many things come back, good conservative reforms that really come back to the leadership issue. So let me just ask you to continue to pray and to encourage those that would be conservative leaders for the great state of Texas.
I think Matt has got a good list. The one thing that I would add to that would also save us a great deal of money, and that is to make English the official language of Texas. And the border security is really got two major parts to it. And if you haven't read them, I suggest you go to DPS's website. They have two very good reports on there. One is about illegal gang activity in Texas, and the other it has to do on violent crimes in Texas. And you'll find in there that most of what's in there comes from people coming across the border with the intent to do harm. And that's what we have to stop. The families, the unaccompanied children, you probably not heard much about it lately, and that's because they have completely changed their strategy. They're no longer the kids and families walking up there and getting across the river. Our government is now sending buses into Mexico. They're loading them on the buses and driving them across the border and dispersing them to the various cities up north where they're going. This is not hearsay. We actually have video of these buses where they have stopped and people on them are being interviewed. So our government is actually participating in part of the human trafficking that's going on, because many of these are not families just coming here for a better life, but they are part of a human trafficking operation that is getting moved up north. And there is more that Texas can do. Adding the troops at the border, I think, was a good first step. But what we need to do, remember that those troops that are down there, and even our DPS officers, they only occupy less than 20% of our border. The rest of it is basically wide open. We have a huge amount of the Texas border that is parks and wildlife property. And you may not realize it, but no one is allowed to go in there. DPS, our troops, the Border Patrol, or customs agents are not even allowed in there. Only the parks and wildlife officers, fish and game officers, are allowed to go in there. And we know that the drug traffickers use those passageways. And of course, that is the federal government's responsibility to do that, and they're not doing it. But we know that the Constitution allows us to defend our state if we are invaded. And it is my humble opinion that what we are seeing is an invasion. And I think the state needs to step up and actually start protecting our border. And I think the only thing that stands between us and doing it is what was mentioned earlier, and that's just the plain will and the courage to do it. And I hope we'll have it soon.
I concur. I'm last year, so all these guys got great ideas, and I concur with them all. First thing we got to do is secure the border, and after we secure the border, we can do something else. But that's number one. E-Verify is probably going to come around. I think you'll see it in the next session, and I think it's time for E-Verify. I'm not excited about putting more burden on small business owners, but the fact is we need E-Verify because all the states around us are going to have it, and it just pushes all the illegals over to Texas because we don't have it. So we're going to have to get E-Verify. A lot of people don't really realize. I like to point this stat out of how damaging illegal immigration is to our budget and to the state of Texas taxpayers. The city of Dallas Independent School District estimates 40,000 of their 170,000 students are illegal. We spend over about $10,000 a student, and that's just in Dallas, Texas, in the Dallas School District. So if you really take that statewide, we spend about $10 billion. We have 5 million children, 5.5 million children in our public school system. Up to 1 million of them are illegal alien children. And that's $10 billion annually that we're spending just to educate them, not counting incarceration, which is about 18,000 illegals in our federal penitentiaries. We've got health care. The whole thing is billions of dollars. What we really need to do is focus on getting the federal government to pay us back hundreds and tens of millions of dollars anyway for the money they owe us for dealing with this problem. It's totally unequitable. And real quick on that on the education issue, that was a Supreme Court ruling, very close decision, 5-4 in 1982, that we had to educate those children. It came out of Smith County, but they didn't say who had to pay for it. They just said that that they have a right to a public education. So I think we need to get our Attorney General, and I'm sure Ken Paxton will be looking into that.
So I think we have time for a couple more issues to talk about. Dorinda, is that a couple more? Real quick. I want to bring up one issue. I know we didn't talk about water tonight. That's another big infrastructure issue in addition to transportation that we can all agree the state has an obligation to fund. I don't want to go into that right now. I want to ask another question. So for the audience, of the $400 billion in state and local debt that you owe to the government, to various governments, 81% of that is at the local level, local government level. So it's $328 billion in local debt, which per capita, per person, is the second highest amount in the United States behind New York. Now it's good because Texas governs locally, and government closest to the people is the most accountable, the most responsive. It's not a bad thing that we rely upon local government. Of that $328 billion, this is a big issue for our organization, for TPPF, for a lot of folks concerned about how we're going to fund transportation and all these other things. Of the $328 billion local governments owe, 40% of that number is interest. Okay? Now on local ballot propositions, when they put school bonds and other bonds on the ballot for you to vote on, do you know that they're not obligated to disclose what the projected interest cost is going to be? So voters don't even see the whole cost when they vote on these propositions. And so one of the big issues for our organization and other organizations concerned about, local debt, city debt, school debt, that makes up 60% of the local debt, is how can we improve the process? How can we increase transparency? So part of that would be to require that local governments disclose what the projected interest cost is going to be before voters vote on it, so they see what the total cost is going to be. Another one is require that they disclose if it's going to affect your property taxes. They don't have to do that either. They don't have to tell you how much debt that government district has on the ballot. So there's completely out of context. So I want to hear from folks up here, is this an important issue? Would they support reform? And what other transparency measures would they support to make government more open and transparent? And then we want to move on to one more quick issue. So anybody can take that. Not everyone has to comment on it, but
Bond debt's always a function of spending. So it's really a spending issue. And if you don't spend the money, you don't need to sell the debt to get the money. So we can have zero-based budgeting and spend less money.
I think, Ross, you mentioned several of the items that could be done to make people more aware. The bond elections that happen locally, there's just a very, very small percentage of the people turn out, and a lot of it is not by accident. The folks that want those bonds passed will manipulate the voting process in order to get the low turnout, and then they do all the advertising for it among those that want to support it. They'll have what you're probably familiar with, rolling polling. That is, they move the polling place around so it makes it more difficult for people to turn out to vote. I think we need to look at some measures that have some minimum number of percentage of people voting in order to pass a bond issue. I think more disclosure, what you talked about, so when people see that they're going to have a bond that's $100 million bond, that what it's going to cost the taxpayers is really $700 or $800 million when it's paid back, and what the impact can be or could be on the property tax, so that there's some full disclosure and transparency, and people are making an informed decision. Another thing is, I think we ought to go to more uniform voting in the state. Have 2 days a year, and everything that gets voted on is on one of those 2 days each year. Not pick these special dates like they do with the school bond issues, where the polls will be set up at the gate for the football field when they're trying to raise money to build a new football stadium. And then wonder, gee whiz, it passed with 3% of the population voting. But some measures like that that bring transparency and some uniformity to it.
Before Mr. Sanford speaks, do you remember a bill like that coming up last session that would address some of those reforms? And what was it? Did Democrats kill it, or can you talk a little bit about how that reform was killed?
Me?
Sure.
Well, I filed that bill. I filed a bill that would have required that it be disclosed on the ballot the amount of the impact that it would have on the average homeowner in that district. It would also require the amount of debt that was being purported, the interest cost, and it also required the bond rating of the entity that was looking to issue more debt, which would have probably rewarded those who had been fiscally prudent, and those and probably would not have rewarded those who didn't. So we'll look forward to either coming alongside someone else who will file that bill this time, or we'll do it ourselves again. It did get a hearing. That bill did get a hearing, but in a Republican-controlled committee. It did not. It was not never brought up for a vote in front of that committee.
The only thing I'll add is Scott's bill, which was a great bill, would have required that information to be put on the ballot. There's nothing keeping that information from being put on the ballot right now, or a locality choosing to put that information on the ballot. However, recently when one locality out in Birdville ISD decided that they were going to put that information voluntarily on the ballot, the Texas Secretary of State issued a letter within what I believe was an incorrect legal opinion, stating that they were prohibited from putting that information on the ballot. So at the very least, even if we don't require it, we need to at least clarify what the law is now, and that it at least allows it, at the very least. And I would support Scott's bill as the optimal solution.
Scott's bill was very good. There was other very good transparency bills that were introduced. The problem is the issue here is not coming up with good transparency ideas. This is a Speaker of the House and House leadership issue, because what happens is a bill like Scott's gets introduced. I was fighting for his bill because I used to sit on the Conference of Urban County Policy Committee, and I lost that vote. So Conference of Urban Counties opposed it. Texas Municipal League opposed it. Every establishment organization out there that wants that debt and lives off that debt fought that and got it killed. It didn't make it to the House floor, right? Yeah, so this is really, bills like this and other things that we talk about that we're all in agreement about, they get killed because of the establishment and the leadership in the House. So that's got to change. We'll always introduce these bills. The problem is it's the House leadership. And getting Mr. Turner, Speaker of the House, will fix a lot of that.
So since that keeps coming up, seems to be a reoccurring theme tonight, that it's not really some of the members failing to introduce good legislation. In fact, some legislation had support in the Senate, companion legislation, but it did not get passed by the House. Can you tell folks in the audience who aren't all from Collin County, some are from Denton County, some are from Dallas County, what should they do? What constructive way can they communicate with their members? Because the members of the House, the first vote of session, will vote for the Speaker, okay? Assuming there's a vote, which there should be. And so what would you tell constituents? How can they effectively communicate and productively communicate to their legislator about the House leadership issue, which keeps coming up as the main problem?
I think we're pretty sure it's going to come to the floor for a vote. So what we need to put in each member of the House's mind is that person has got to go back to their district and face their constituents. So all 150 members, or I guess 95 Republicans, need to be aware of the fact that they're going to have to go back to their district and explain their vote. I think it's as simple as that. So those House members need to hear from their district that they better vote for Scott, otherwise they're going to have an opponent and there's going to be the grassroots against them. Because I believe we're going to make sure that it gets to the House floor for a vote. So those will be different dynamics than I think in the past.
I'll be more direct. What I would say is this is the most important vote of the session. Just to say, every single thing we talked about today would have been done last session if we had a speaker like Scott Turner. It would have already been done. Instead, what was passed out of the House was Senate Bill 346, which actually limited the free speech of conservative organizations and exempted labor unions from those same laws. The Lilly Ledbetter Act got passed through the House, which I think only 3 U.S. congressmen actually voted for who were Republicans when it passed the U.S. House, or in a similar bill did. Only 3 Republicans in the liberal U.S. Congress, but it passed the Republican-controlled House and the Senate. Bill after bill after bill like this passed. And these bills did not get passed because of leadership. So what I would tell my House rep, if I wasn't going to Austin next time, is vote for Scott Turner for Speaker of the House, or you will never get my vote again in a primary, ever.
Candy brought up the fact that you already have on your tables some cards you can fill out to let Team Turner know that you support them. If you do not live in a district where someone is publicly supporting Scott, so in Collin County, that would be, so Matt, you've got Matt and myself and Jeff and Scott, of course, have all publicly endorsed Scott Turner. And if you live in a district with someone who hasn't explicitly said so, let them know that you expect that of them. But more importantly, if you have friends in other counties that are precinct chairs or activists, tell them to activate their networks and to let them know to do the same thing, to let the representative know what you expect or what they expect of them.
This is going to be fun because one of the things I was told is the Senate's not supposed to comment about what the House does. However, this is my chance to be politically incorrect, which I love to do. And that is, we need Scott Turner to be Speaker of the House so that all the good conservative legislation that Don and I and the other 6 freshman senators are going to be sending to the House will have a chance of being passed. And what's been said is the only way that's going to happen is make sure that you and all of your friends and neighbors and everyone else in your district contacts your rep and make sure that they know that if they don't, just like Matt said, if they don't make that first vote, because all the rest, that's more important than all the rest, any of the rest of those put together. Don't make the right one, that they'll never ever get your vote again, and you'll work hard to get them out of office next time. Real easy.
Well, we're not supposed to comment on that because I'm in the Senate side, but I will point out the obvious, and I would suggest that you point it out also to your representative. And there's 2 things that'll happen when they take that floor vote. If they vote for Strauss, they are going to get primaried. They're going to have a 70 to 80% chance of getting primaried, and they're going to have a 60-70% chance of losing. And they have just sealed their fate for their political career of moving to a higher office. Once you're aligned with the speaker, good or bad, but once they align with that speaker, they will not win another race in the state of Texas except the position they've got. You can look around the state, you can see who's won. It's the conservative candidates, the guys that believe in liberty and freedom. The grassroots get behind us, and we're going to win. And so that's the 2 things that are going to mean more to them than anything else. If you just explain that to them, you're going to get primaried, you're going to get beat in the primary, and you will never move to another position in the state government, whether it's the Senate or statewide. Your career is finished. I think there's going to be some people paying attention to that vote.
So I just want to thank everyone for inviting me to be a part of this event, and thanks everyone for coming despite the bad weather. I want to thank all of our panelists who were willing to come out and take the time to talk about the session that'll be coming up here in January, including some of the important issues. I do just want to remind everyone, I know everyone here is very involved in what's going on, but just want to reiterate the point that we need to be vigilant at every level of government. We can't continue to allow people to ignore local elections, to ignore county elections, to be uninformed. If just the people who are involved in this room really engage, during the session, keep their friends posted about what's going on. Our organization is going to do the best job we can to get information out there, to give people some guidance and some direction. But again, if we want to maintain a self-governing society, we have to be actively involved. And it doesn't take a majority to be actively involved. The primary elections have shown that time and time again. I would just continue everyone here to continue to be involved at the state level where we can have a big impact, and especially at the local level, to put better people in office at the local level, to give our legislators who are doing a good job the support they need to make some of these legislative reforms. So thanks to everyone for coming, and Dorinda has a couple more comments to make.